Welcome to Peninsula TV's coverage of the 2019 Progress Seminar. For 50 years, the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce has been holding this weekend retreat, bringing together community leaders from businesses and nonprofits, and also our local government for keynote sessions and to meet up close and personal in breakout sessions, discussing current community issues and problems of today. This year's topics included criminal justice reform in California. What are the impacts? Mobility funding, getting the wheels turning, the housing crisis, modern solutions, and the political will behind them. Regionalism. We are stronger together than apart. Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency Agency, a unified voice for a resilient San Mateo County shoreline by 2100. And now, on to Peninsula TV's coverage of the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce 2019 Progress Seminar.
It's my pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Dr. Dean Winslow, also a retired colonel with the Air National Guard. His impressive bio can be found in your program, so I will simply offer some quick highlights. Dr. Winslow is a professor of medicine with appointments in both Division of Hospital Medicine and the Division of Infectious Diseases and Geographic Medicine at Stanford University. He grew up in Dover, Delaware, attended Penn State as an undergraduate, and Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. Dr. Winslow has extensive experience in the development of pharmaceuticals to address HIV and served as chief of the Division of AIDS Medicine at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center from 2003 to 2012. Colonel Winslow entered the Louisiana Air National Guard in 1980 as a general medical officer. He became a flight surgeon in 1983, and he was a distinguished graduate of the School of Aerospace Medicine. He served as commander of the 159th Medical Group from 1992 to 1995 and was state air surgeon, Delaware Air National Guard, 1995 to 2011. By the way, this is the edited bio. We had to crunch this down a little bit. He is also a 2007 graduate of the Air War College. Colonel Winslow was deployed to the Middle East 6 times from 2003 to 2011 as a flight surgeon supporting combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. His aeronautical rating is Chief Flight Surgeon, and he has logged 1,150 military flying hours, including 431 combat hours and 263 combat sorties, and has flown numerous military aircraft. He also holds an airline transport pilot license and type ratings in the Boeing 737, Douglas DC-3, the L-29 Delphin, and the L-39 Albatross racing jets. In 2018, he co-founded Scrubs, addressing the Firearm Epidemic, or SAFE, which unites doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals to address gun violence in the United States as a public health issue, which it is, and to advocate for education of healthcare providers, research, and evidence-backed policy to reduce gun violence. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Dean Winslow. Honored to have you. You got the mic.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It really is truly an honor to be here. It's an amazingly impressive meeting, and I want to thank everyone from the business community, from labor, all of our elected officials who are here, all working together. And this, in my mind, this is the way America really should be. So thank you all so much for what you do. Just a quick thing, and thank you. That was a lovely introduction. My mom would have liked that. But just to be really clear, my name, it's Dean. It's a name, not a title. I always explain that to medical students and residents at Stanford. So anyway, kind of before I launch into some of the slides, I just wanted to, just by way of introduction, kind of say that I really come before you wearing many hats. Number one, as a doctor who took an oath to care for patients and also to prevent disease. Second, as a former military officer who during the course of these multiple deployments unfortunately has seen up close the horrific injuries resulting from gunshot wounds. Thirdly, as a father who loves his children more than life itself. And fourth, as a Christian who believes that the central teaching of the New Testament is that of unconditional love for all human beings, and also to truly be our brother's keeper. And that means to protect particularly the vulnerable in our population. I know that's something that you all believe in as well. The ready availability of guns in the U.S. results in the death of somewhere between 38 and 40,000 people each year. And this is, many-fold greater than the number of people who die anymore from automobile accidents. And again, these deaths are suicides, homicides, and accidental shootings. Gun violence truly is a health crisis, and it really is a public health issue that I believe strongly can actually be addressed the way we've addressed many other diseases which we no longer deal with in America, including smallpox, and again, the list could go on. We can do better when it comes to gun violence, and we need to advocate for research on gun violence and develop evidence-backed interventions to reduce gun violence in the U.S. And again, one of the purpose of this organization that has started, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it, was really to teach doctors, nurses, teachers, and social workers, how to educate their patients, their pupils, and their parents on gun safety. So anyway, I just wanted to thank my wife, who unfortunately couldn't come, for putting these slides together here. So let's see, I think, yeah. And again, just a little bit of background. These are the two kind of co-founders of this organization. So Sara Beth Spitzer is just this amazing medical student, fourth-year medical student at Stanford, who's been very interested in gun violence. In fact, we were able to arrange to have her work with Garen Wintemute up at UC Davis, who's kind of one of the really foremost experts on the epidemiology of gun violence. And Sara Beth actually was recently accepted to a very prestigious surgical residency program in Boston. And again, just a little bit, the guy on the left there testifying, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit, maybe to give you a laugh about how sometimes good things come out of things that originally aren't so positive. So anyway, with caveat, I've been a lifelong Republican, although I consider myself a very liberal Republican, and I belong proudly to one of the more liberal churches in the United States. But my friend Jim Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, and I became really good friends at Stanford when my wife and I were resident fellows in the dormitory, and had been over to our house several times. And bottom line was that he asked me to serve as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs after President Trump basically nominated him to be the Secretary of Defense. So finally, after being vetted by the Trump administration, I testified before the United States Senate, the Armed Services Committee chaired by Senator McCain. And my wife and I actually were teaching at Oxford in the UK. And so, I took a red-eye flight and arrived real early in the morning. And after some very quick briefings by the Pentagon Legislative Affairs staff, started my testimony in the Dirksen Senate Office building. And remember, this was actually November of 2017, and it was literally like 36 hours after the horrific mass shooting in the Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, where 26 people lost their lives. And, obviously as a Christian and just as a human being, it's very upsetting to hear something like that. And it's certainly a contrast to a place like the UK, which has almost no gun violence and that sort of thing. So I fielded a few tough questions and got yelled at once by Senator McCain for having waiting lists at the VA in Phoenix. And then Jack Reed kind of shook his sleeve and said, John, Dr. Winslow has nothing to do with the VA. He's up for health, health affairs at the Pentagon. It's a separate system. But he didn't apologize, but it kind of threw me off balance. And then, answered several questions about, my vision for healthcare, the military healthcare system, and I thought things were going well. And then Senator Shaheen, who's a very liberal Democratic senator from New Hampshire, then asked me something which I was obviously not prepared for, since it had nothing to do with my job. And she said, Colonel Winslow, why was Devin Kelly, who was the shooter in this terrible thing that happened the day before, why was he given a bad conduct rather than a dishonorable discharge from the United States Air Force? And I said, well, ma'am, first of all, that's a JAG issue, not a medical issue. But she said, well, what are you going to do about it? And I said, well, ma'am, I would recommend to Secretary Mattis that he convene an IG inspection, Inspector General inspection, to look at root causes. And I should have stopped there, but and I said, well, and ma'am, while we're talking about root causes, as a flight surgeon, I was involved in investigating, unfortunately, many fatal aircraft mishaps over the years. And every single time that we saw a fatal mishap, there was a whole chain of events leading up to that mishap. Whereas if you had interrupted any link in that chain, that the mishap wouldn't have happened. And I said, in the case of a mass shooting like happened over the weekend, you have to look at the first obvious link in the chain is like, why do we allow civilians in the United States unrestricted access to assault rifles? And at that point, that might... Confirmation hearing was pretty much over at that point. So Senator McCain then said, Dr. Winslow, that's not in your area of responsibility or authority, which he's exactly right. And he passed away last year, as you know. And again, there's really no hard feelings. And I do believe that when I join John McCain in heaven, as a fellow military aviator, I've understand that they have a really nice officers club with a bar in it in heaven. And so I'm sure McCain feels bad, and he will actually greet me at the bar with at least a nice pint of beer. So at least that's my fantasy. So, okay. So anyway, coming back, being a Midwesterner originally, we were always taught if you're given lemons, you make lemonade out of it. So a lot of people at Stanford, including my wife and a number of the faculty, including Abraham Verghese, that you may have heard of, the best-selling author, encouraged us to start this organization to really empower physicians and healthcare providers to speak with patients about firearm safety, to eliminate the funding gap for public health research into firearms injuries and deaths. And as many of you know, I think it was 1996, Representative Dickey, who was a Republican from Arkansas, felt very strongly that federal tax dollars should not be used in funding firearms research or preventing injuries. So that's a whole other story. So one of our goals of our organization is to really advocate strongly to restore federal funding for research. And I think that may happen, in this next Congress. Again, I think certainly the House will pass that. One of the issues will be, though, is to try to get the 60 votes necessary in the U.S. Senate that could potentially override a veto. And I think there's a good chance that we can do that. And then lastly, our goal is to advocate for evidence-backed policies to prevent firearms injuries and deaths. So these are some of the chapters that we have currently. So I think right now we've got something like 42 or 43 medical schools all around the United States that are part of our team, and again are working with their own medical schools, with their own elected representatives to really advocate for these things. And we actually had this amazing event back on September 17th of 2018, where at most places at noon, wherever it was local time, that all 42 of these medical schools, we had upwards of 200, 300 students at most of these schools, including Stanford, that actually didn't leave patient care, but if they weren't involved in patient care, walked out all wearing matching scrubs that our organization provided to have an awareness event. And then most places, including what we did at Stanford, then we had a 3-hour-long seminar, really, where we had experts talking about gun violence and what we can do to to help reduce this based on what we know already. Again, some of the things, so we generated a fair amount of news, but again, the purpose of this is to really try to move the needle in the United States on gun violence. One of the things that we're in the process of doing right now is developing web-based training for doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, social workers, teachers, how to actually talk to their patients and basically their clients about gun safety. And one of the things that's really important, as all of you know, being experts in your field, is that to have credibility, you actually have to know something and to talk to people. So I think it's really a mistake to think that you're going to somehow persuade someone that they should provide more safe storage for their firearms or other issues that we know work when you yourself don't know anything about guns or firearms. So that's actually part of the curriculum that we're developing, is to try to teach people who may themselves not have personal experience with firearms a little bit about the background. So that's one of the things. Another issue is many states now, not just California, even many of the red states now have robust red flag laws. And these red flag laws, and I won't go into all the details, but basically one of the things is that it allows someone, let's say your 90-year-old grandfather has developed dementia, and yet he has an arsenal of guns. And so that the family members can actually go to law enforcement and actually have the weapons removed. And there is a court process, a due process that goes around that. And of course, domestic violence and other perpetrators, these are already in many cases covered in terms of having restraining orders and things, even prior to many of these red flag laws being introduced. So again, having healthcare professionals aware of these red flag laws and how to implement them is also part of the training. How and when to talk to patients about firearm safety is kind of self-explanatory. And how and when to talk to parents about firearm safety. This is really, really important. And this is a place where I can certainly see many of the people in this room and involved in this Progress seminar could really play a role. So more to follow. I won't go through this slide in detail, but even though we always start out and say, well, gosh, we do need to fund more research, and that is clearly true about firearm safety. But there actually are already a number of policies that have been proven to work. And so again, I'd be happy to share these slides with you if you're interested. But many things that actually do have evidence behind them that already have been shown to be effective, including universal background checks, standardized mandatory waiting periods for firearms, and then of course some type of a screening prior to purchase that would help weed out some of the people that frankly should not safely possess weapons. So what are the next steps? So one of the things, and again I want to single out, and I think Representative Spear is going to be here later today, I believe is your closing plenary speaker. She has been amazingly helpful, along with Speaker Pelosi's office and Representative Anna Eshu's office, in terms of helping organize. We're having actually a lobbying day on Capitol Hill the 10th, 11th, and 12th of June. We're going to be focusing primarily on Senate offices. So we're going to have at least 2 doctors from every state in the union, and hopefully a whole bunch of medical students and other health professionals all really show up. So again, like to let you know about that, and thank you really for your support. One of the things I'd like to do, I think I have maybe 5 more minutes or so to talk, and I know we're maybe running a little late. First of all, just show of hands, how many folks here in the room are also veterans of the military? Great, good. Thanks so much for your service, and look, maybe we'll have a break. I'd love to, talk to you individually and hear your stories. How many also people here might be pilots, either civilian or military pilots? So great. So you guys will really, appreciate, I think, some of this stuff. So I want to make it real clear: this is not official safe stuff. This is just Dean Winslow, just little bit of personal opinion about one of the ways to think about gun violence. So a lot of people have already said, and I completely agree with it, that if we regulated guns and firearms just the way that we do automobiles, we would actually be way ahead of things in terms of having, national registration, uniform registration. I mean, basically every car, at least if it's running, has to be registered in a state. And every state that I know of requires at least some type of proficiency testing in order to get a driver's license. And there's at least, for vision anyway, there's some type of medical screening that goes into it. And I'd like to say, though, but because firearms are just so uniquely deadly, that we need to go maybe a little step beyond what we do for automobiles and people who want to drive. And so, again, as a pilot, I've always thought that actually might be a good way to think about guns. So this was an Iraqi soldier I took care of, I think, 12 years ago or so, who had been shot through and through the abdomen with an assault rifle. And he actually did well. He was amazingly lucky. The bullet really missed kind of all vital structures. This was a patient who didn't do well. Just to orient you, his leg has been amputated. This was an insurgent who had, maybe some of you had even read about this. It was, I think, back in 2006 during my third deployment. And this guy had actually shot down an Apache gunship helicopter. And the aircraft crashed and burned. And then he posted on an Islamist website he and his buddies dragging the American pilots' bodies out of the aircraft and stabbing them, I think, with a bayonet. And this was posted on an Islamist website. And I think even his buddies thought that was a little over the top. So he was basically ratted out to the Coalition Forces hotline. And U.S. Navy SEAL leading a team of Iraqi Special Forces operators actually found the guy, and there was this firefight, and at one point the SEAL shot this guy in the leg, and it severed his femoral artery. And I remember the SEAL actually telling me that after he shot the guy, he hesitated for a second, he ran over, disarmed him, and then he inserted a roll of Kerlex into this wound that was pumping blood, and then put a combat application tourniquet on the guy, and then started an IV and saved the guy's life. And this was the man who had killed 2 Americans a week before. So this is really who Americans are. Anyway, it breaks my heart. So by the time the bad guy got to our hospital, he'd lost a lot of blood, but he was still alive, and we took him to the OR. We couldn't save his life, but we did amputate his leg. So anyway, it's just, again, what assault rifle does in the case. So some of the sad stuff that you see, of course, are the people that you can't save, and I'll think of this forever. One of the quotes, I think everybody's familiar with the story Job in the Bible, and I often thought about that, and have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? And that was sort of God's dismissive answer to Job when Job sort of questioned, which I think most of us would do, like, why, did you take my family away from me, and you burned my orchards, and you took my children and everything. But so God and the devil kind of have this bet going, and it's really a very dismissive answer. But I always thought about this, that I would hopefully have an answer that the answer is that love is the most powerful force in the universe. But anyway, it's not the world that we live in. So this is just some scenes of Iraq. And as I mentioned, I'm personally comfortable about guns. I don't own a gun in my house. I've always had children and now grandchildren. I would not want the risk of having a weapon in my own home. But I certainly respect people that do, and I understand and respect people that safely handle guns, and if you even enjoy shooting them recreationally. That's not the purpose. And I honor the fact of the Second Amendment. I actually honor all of the amendments to the Constitution, not just the second. But I think people do have an inherent right to protect themselves. But again, this absolutely, I think, insane version of the Second Amendment that has really been promulgated more recently. Is I think we really need to relook at that. But as I said, though, I am pro Second Amendment. So anyway, going back to the airplane analogy, so all aircraft have to be registered and then re-registered with the FAA every 4 years. Every airplane that you fly, has to have either an annual or 100-hour inspection. You have to keep an airplane. You can't keep it in your backyard as a general rule. It has to be kept at like San Carlos Airport or Palo Alto Airport behind a locked gate. And you have to have ground and flight instruction before you can fly a plane. And you have to have knowledge testing, and you have to be able to demonstrate in flight with an FAA examiner your ability to safely operate that aircraft. And then, of course, for special aircraft like large or turbojet aircraft, you have to have what's called a special type rating. So again, the analogy there would be if you want to own an assault rifle, that you probably should have special training and special qualification. And again, every 2 years, even if you're just a private pilot, you have to go up with an FAA examiner every 2 years. And then lastly, you actually have to have liability and hull insurance on the airplane, currently something we don't require at all of people that own firearms. So again, just to kind of finish this up here, if we thought of guns as we did about airplanes, all weapons would have to be registered with the, say, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms every 4 years. You'd have to store your weapons securely. You'd have to carry liability insurance on your weapons with sort of the liability, the rate anyway, would be sort of proportional to the destructive power of the gun. And I do still feel very strongly that assault weapons and large capacity magazines should not be allowed in private homes. But certainly I have no problem if you enjoy shooting them, but they should be kept secured at a gun range where you can't use them for mass shootings. In terms of people who own guns, I think you should be 21 years or older. You should have a universal federal background check. I'd also feel you should have to undergo a complete physical exam by a licensed doctor with at least some informal cognitive or psychological assessment, which is sort of what an aviation medical examiner does every couple of years. And then in terms of proficiency, I think it's not unreasonable to say if you want to shoot a gun, you have to have initial and recurrent training every 2 years on each type of weapon that you own, and then special training and certifications, say for concealed carry and open carry, which actually many states already have. And then just lastly, again, to me, I think the Sandy Hook shooting was just one of the most horrific things. And it was very sad that despite what I think was, as all of us as parents would agree, was one of the most heartbreaking scenarios to happen, that really nothing happened in terms of gun control. And again, I don't want to be negative. I think actually now things are more positive than they've been for a long time. But again, there was this quote by this British columnist that he said that in retrospect, Sandy Hook marked the end of the US gun control debate. And he referred to this, again, this horrific 2012 attack. And he said, once America decided killing children was bearable, it was over. And again, I hope we don't feel that way. And then lastly, I think many of you know that shortly after the Parkland shootings, then there was a paper that actually came out by Garen Wintemute and others that talked about the role that doctors should play in preventing and reducing firearms death. The National Rifle Association came out and said basically publicly that self-important anti-gun doctors should stay in their lane. And again, most of us have said, no, this is our lane. So thank you for your support.